Good morning, everyone. We're ready to start. Welcome to the February WACO meeting. I know a lot of you, we were all together last night here in Irvine, but it was a quick, short amount of time, and we're together again. So I'd like to, first thing, a Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to ask... I'm going to go ahead and do it. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next item is our introduction of guests. Any guests, new guests, maybe people that have not been here for a while? Okay, we're all among the normal people here today. Next is our report from the Metropolitan Water District, Director Ackerman. She's getting ready to go on her Colorado River Aqueduct trip.
You're not going to get a long report. I know that disappoints you. That was a joke. This month, the Water Planning and Stewardship Committee at Metropolitan is probably going to be handling most of what's happening in water at Metropolitan. We also they pretty much dominated last month. We had an item on the agenda that we discussed last month regarding a 2-year agreement that we would enter into with the California Department of Water Resources to pay up to $46 million from our Water Management Fund to purchase state water project supplies, if offered, under the multi-year water pool demonstration program that exists. These supplies would help improve dry year water supplies in 2015-2016. We participated in this program in 2013-14 and secured about 30,000 acre-feet of water, for which we paid $253 per acre-foot. We'll be taking a vote on this at the meeting next week to participate again. We had a thorough report on our water surplus and drought management plan, and we will be given monthly reports through May of this year. Just some highlights from that report. January 2014 produced the lowest snowpack in history, the 4th lowest runoff in history, and a 5% allocation, also the lowest in history. Temperatures were 4% higher than average, and Met had a 1.1 million acre-foot drop in storage, the largest drawdown in reserves in Met's history. We did receive a 10% bump in allocations, so we are now up to 15% allocation, which is better than 5. Because of the December storms, San Juan Reservoir is up, as is Oroville. The exports in the Delta in December went into the San Luis Reservoir, where we need to have it balancing the system. Operational changes in the Delta that I touched on last month, which were designed to help with the turbidity that the Delta smelt like to hide and ride in, were a partial success, and we were able to deliver about 80,000 acre-feet of water that would otherwise have been lost to the ocean. Not our favorite thing. We will have a detailed discussion about allocation plans next week at Met and a scenario for implementation when needed and as needed. We will also be talking about possible changes to our turf removal program, which has been a more than huge success. We may have to make changes to modify that as time goes on, and we will be discussing exactly how we plan to do that. The very good news, as I'm sure most of you have heard, it's supposed to rain very heavily for the next days up north. It should produce 15 inches of rain. This will be a warm storm, unfortunately, so the snow is not really expected. They may get it at high elevations, but obviously the water will be very helpful for Shasta and Lake Oroville. We have one possibly contentious bill next week, which has been introduced in the Senate by Senator Jeff Stone. His bill would allow recreational body contact in Diamond Valley Reservoir. We are taking an oppose. Staff is recommending an oppose on this bill. And keep in mind that this is a reservoir for drinking water, and it is Southern California's emergency supply. And there are a lot of different issues that would make it very difficult to make this a recreational facility. I'll report back to you next month on what occurred at the meeting. And now for that fact, I keep telling you, they are getting harder and harder to find. And if you're a scientist and you know the answer to this, just keep smiling. In a 100-year period, a water molecule spends 98 years in the ocean, 20 months in ice, and less than a week in the atmosphere. Did you know that?
When Linda first started out talking about the hydrologic conditions, about this is the worst of the worst in terms of water supply, I thought, geez, a lot of gloom and doom. And I was going to say, well, the stock market was up a couple points at around a quarter to 7 this morning, but I'm glad that she amplified that water supply conditions have improved somewhat, and we're going to get a larger allocation from the state. So we're on a positive note right now. Talking about a positive note, Pierre, I know you have a lot of good things to say. Join us.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, the Aqua Board met last week to go over its strategic plan. There's a lot of refinement. It will come out in March. It's hard to follow up after last year. More or less, you have to take care of the good things that you got last year and do a good job on it. So that's the focus. I want to remind people that on February 25th, there is a meeting in Washington, D.C. It's the Washington Conference. If you have not gone, you ought to go at least once. This is a wonderful opportunity to meet with not only your fellow directors and senior staff and the water agencies, but to meet with the legislators and regulators and get their perspective of what's going on. A trip to Washington, D.C. is often an eye-opening experience. You wonder how we survive so well sometimes. On March the 4th, there was a corresponding conference in Sacramento on the state legislative deal that is highly recommended because the state has much more to impact us than D.C., which has sort of run out of money. The spring conference is coming up on May 5th, and Aqua is doing something that they haven't really done before. On June 24th, they're sponsoring a Bay Delta tour. For those couple of you that haven't ever gone to that will be an enlightening experience. It'll be interesting to see what they say about it. And that's the Aqua report. Thank you. Good to see you, AJ.
Very good. Thank you for these reports. You might recall our meeting in February. We had the title of the meeting was An Elephant in the Room, and we had representatives from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and from the Salton Sea Authority, and to give us an update on a couple of environmental activities that could have an impact on water supplies here in Southern California. In the case of LA, it's been a definite impact. They've lost about half of their supply from the Owens Valley and the Mono Basin. And on the Salton Sea side, it's a wait and see to see if the agricultural runoff is going to be part of the solution to the Salton Sea problem. And that leads us to where we are this morning. I don't view it as another elephant in the room, but it's something for us to be extremely concerned with. We all know that agricultural users account for the majority, if not more, of the water use in California. And we've heard information on the plight that's occurring in the agricultural community relative to water supply. And we cannot, as M&I type of customers, be immune to what's happening in the agricultural community. We're fortunate today to have two great speakers and representatives to talk about two facets of the agricultural community, the drought, and the water supply situation. One is on water policy or agricultural policy issues, and the other is what is the actual farmer grower facing at the present time. We've heard stories about what is happening, but I think we're going to get some on the ground on someone that's totally aware of the plight. You might call it, we'll find out it's the plight or whether it's how bad it is that the individual farmers are facing. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is a representative from the Westlands Water District in the San Joaquin Valley. They're at the northern end. They're the largest agricultural water agency in the United States, and certainly have a great interest in water supply availability to their service area. Our speaker has been with Westlands as a public affairs representative responsible for governmental affairs and legislative activities. She prior to that was a office assistant and office district director for 3 legislative people from the Assembly and Senate over a 13 or 14 year period. And prior to that, worked for the Federal Department of Transportation on many assignments throughout the United States. So she's got a great background in working for the federal government, in working for the legislative people, and now at a water district that's really so-called boots on the ground as far as the concerns of the agricultural community. So at this time, please join me in welcoming Gayle Holman. And we're going to find out how the agricultural community is doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I got the call just literally not even 36 hours ago, and so I hopped in the car yesterday and drove down here and got here last night in time to attend the dinner that occurred over at the Westlands. So thank you for this opportunity. So people always ask, what does it look like? Here we are, agriculture, Central Valley, and the news isn't good. The news is grim. We are at a 0 water allocation. We've just come off of our first ever year of a water allocation that started at 0 and ended at 0. We're making history in the worst possible way. So let me give you that intro, and let me just back up real quick and tell you a little bit about how we got where we are and what we're doing to basically survive. So Westlands is the largest agricultural water district in the nation, and it's located between 2 different counties, encompasses 2 different counties of Fresno and Kings counties. And we are very fortunate that we have 600,000 acres of prime farmland, and our growers that are all family-owned growers, family farms, grow 60 different crops for the fresh, frozen, canned, dried markets, and produce typically in excess of $1 billion each year, just within Westlands. But the district, as large as it is, we are, let me jump ahead. So here's the location of Westlands. So we are basically from Kettleman City at the southern point along the I-5 corridor all the way up to about just south of Los Banos in Firebaugh. And so we're about 15 to 20 miles wide, and all of our water that we have is contracted with the Central Valley Project. So we are a public water agency contracted for the federal side only. That's where our contract is. We don't have a state water project allocation, just the contract water. So we know there are a number of issues that exist regarding that. So currently, with the water that we receive, it is delivered to on-farm 700 family farms, but we have a buried water delivery system. So within Westlands, when it was created through an act of the legislature back in 1952, the growers at that time saw the need to bring irrigated agriculture to a different level, because prior to that, the farming, it had been realized that the area, the soil is rich, it's wonderful, it's abundant, it does a wonderful job with those hot summers. I mean, how many of you have been through the area and know that 105 is that's a normal cool day in the Central Valley. So 107 degrees is nothing for us in the summertime. But delivering that water and not pulling on groundwater, which is what had been the case of early farming. Early farming were drawing on groundwater, and so the project was built, and so within Westlands, they put in a buried irrigation delivery system. So basically, there's over 1,034 miles, a highway of pipes underneath all of the farms in Westlands that delivers water that comes directly off of the San Luis Reservoir, off of the San Luis Canal, the California aqueduct that originates in the San Luis Reservoir. And so what happens is, as you already most likely know, that our water source begins up in Northern California. So it begins up with the snowpack and the rainfall up in the high Sierras above Shasta. And so the water then flows into Lake Shasta. From there it comes down through the Sacramento River, and then it enters the Delta. And once it enters the Delta, all the dynamics change. We know that the political hot point, the fisheries interests, the boating interests, all of the different interests, agriculture, urban, anything that enters the Delta, then it becomes basically a war zone for water deliveries. And so as that water then goes through the Delta, if it is allowed to, it will be pumped into the Delta Mendota Canal and brought down into, eventually into the San Luis Reservoir. And the San Luis Reservoir is the primary holding place of where water for agricultural purposes for water districts like Westlands occurs. But we know that that is becoming more and more difficult. But as that water then is allowed to flow down south through the California aqueduct, and it flows down toward regions like Westlands, one of the things that we have is that we have a delivery system that connects with the aqueduct, but we have meters. And so when the Bureau of Reclamation delivers water to Westlands, they deliver it through a meter. So every drop of water is accounted for. And then from there, our growers, through that buried irrigation system, all of the highway of pipes, then we deliver water to their fields, and at the corner of every field is a water meter that then measures exactly how much water a grower receives. So when we're criticized and told that agriculture is using too much water, you need to employ conservation techniques, you need to be good stewards of water, we become very, very frustrated because we have our water metered 2 different times, and actually the Department of Water Resources has to check those numbers as well. So as I'm told, on paper, we're actually metered 3 times. We can account for every drop of water that arrives on a field within Westlands. I don't know too many other water districts that have that type of infrastructure that's built into place and that was put into place back in the early 50s. And then our first water deliveries off of the San Luis Canal began in 1968. And we are still using that same infrastructure. But you need water. And of course, we know that that is the crux of everything. So when you have a dry couple of winters like we've had, and the snowpack is really low, and we have a number of new game players that have come into play, all of a sudden there's formulas that are used by the water agencies that manage the Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Water Resources, that they manage the deliveries of water. And so the difficulty that we've had is ESA law, environmental species law, has come into play. And it has come into play where now more and more water on an annual basis is dedicated or redirected from agriculture and dedicated to fish species. And so here's an example of some of the fish species that exist in the Delta. We know that there are many others that are in there as well, but these are the ones that are of concern, and you probably recognize a number of them. Delta smelt, I think all of us, if you didn't know what a delta smelt was, you learned back in 2009, where the first time ever in the history of the Central Valley Project, the delta smelt managed to bring water allocations to a zero. So in 2009, our initial water allocation for the first time ever was zero. It eventually was raised to 10%, but it was devastating. And that devastation continues today. The projects haven't recovered. And so when we look at the Environmental Species Act, and please don't get me wrong, please know that we know the health of the Delta is vitally important. 2/3 of the state of California, the folks sitting here in this room, all that you represent, depend on the health and viability of the Delta. But so far, the solution has been based toward transitioning water, again, away from agriculture and providing it for environment. Well, that would be okay, except anyone know what's occurring with the Delta smelt and the Chinook salmon now? Is the Delta rebounding? The Delta is declining even more. In fact, right now it's at its worst that it's ever been. But we're at a zero water allocation. State Water Project last year initially was at a zero water allocation. For the first time ever in the history of two projects, you had them both at zero. When you hear people talk about the system is broken, that's what they mean. We have a state of California that invested in an incredible water delivery system to bring water from Northern California down to Central and Southern California, and it sits idle. It's broken. It's broken because we have gotten wrapped up with ESA laws. ESA laws now take priority over so many different things, even encumbering upon municipal and industrial water deliveries. So let me give you an idea of kind of how we got where we are. So when a fish is listed on an endangered species, then it automatically falls under a biological opinion. And a biological opinion is then overseen by the respective agencies that are put into place according to law to manage. So you might have Department of Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries, and so each one of these fish species has a whole handbook of how to be treated. And it's huge. I'm told that it encompasses 1,000+ pages of documentation on how it's to be operated and protected for the fish species. But nowhere in the biological opinions does it take into account economic and human harm. So we're protecting fish, but in the meantime, we're decimating agriculture. We are wiping out communities that are dependent upon it. And so that is something that I want you to keep in mind, because you represent many, many people, and it's slowly, if you haven't seen it creep into your neighborhood, it is. It's slowly creeping in, and it's affecting everyone. But here's an example of biological opinions that have different mandates of what needs to occur. So when water is brought down through the Sacramento River through the Delta, then ultimately it's pumped into our reservoirs, because that's where we need it. That's our storage tank, our holding place, our bank account for water that we're then going to use when the days are dry, when the summers are hot, and we need it. But here's the calendar that reflects what needs to occur when you can pump. So the blue boxes are when you cannot pump at full capacity. There's limitations because you are in alignment with, at the top, it's showing the Central Valley Project and State Water Project environmental requirements due to the State Water Resources Control Board Bay Delta standards. Okay, so we've limited some of our pumping by months. But then we add on a discretionary Central Valley Project Improvement Act, because that was in 1992, that mandated that 800,000 acre-feet of water would automatically be rediverted and put into agriculture to support the health of the Delta. This is nothing new. We've been working on it for 20+ years. So we limit some of the time there in the winter months that we can do flow pump into our reservoirs. And then we add on some VAMP restrictions, longfin, smelt, Old Middle River restrictions and granted, these are layer upon layer of restrictions for pumping into our storage areas. And we add on salmon exports, And then the fall X2 flows, but we still have a couple of boxes, so we're doing okay. We can get a little bit of water through, right? Now let's just wipe out the whole thing with National Marine Fisheries temperature and flow standards, which is what we're doing right now. You may have heard that there's, Director Ackerman that was speaking right before, I was quite impressed with her quick little delivery of everything. This is the result of when you hear temperature, salinity control, all those elements that play into the delta, and the agencies that are required by law, because they have to adhere to ESA law that mandates water cannot be pumped further south of the delta. It needs to stay in the delta for the protection of fish species and head right underneath that Golden Gate Bridge, uncaptured, but all in the spirit of keeping the health of the delta and revitalizing the fish species. The difficulty is we have no measurable benefit that shows we have turned that situation around. As I said, everything continues to decline. So as we've put more and more water aside, other agency heads have started looking at maybe there are other stressors that are causing the decline of the delta. Here are just a few. We know that one of the major metropolitan water districts in the Sacramento area was dumping untreated sewage water and then putting ammonia on it. They have until, I think, next year to clean that up. They were given a 3-year time frame, but you have a lot of elements that shouldn't be in the delta. We also have upstream diversions. We meter every drop of water that we have, but quite frankly, there are many growers that are north of the delta, that are along the Sacramento River, that can easily just put their pump in there, pump out what they need directly onto their farm. They're good to go. There actually was just an order that came down yesterday that prohibits that from occurring. So we'll see where that goes. It's something that's new and being watched. We also have invasive species. So the Port of Stockton, we know the Port of Stockton is right there, heart of the delta. We have an Asian clam that came in through the Port of Stockton on the hull of a ship, got there and realized, hey, this is lovely, warm, I think I'm going to stay a while. Well, now this invasive species, this clam, is actually changing the dynamics and the natural balance and causing disruptions. We also have, you can read them there for yourself, but another huge one that you've probably seen is sport fishing. We know that the delta is a wonderful place for sport fishing. Well, we have the bass, the wide-mouthed bass, that are not native to the delta, but they were brought in for sport fishing. Well, guess what they eat? They eat salmon fry and they eat delta smelt. And so as we watch the numbers continue to decline, those of us that are on the agricultural side, or maybe on the continuing limited amount of water deliveries, we're saying, can you look at some of the other stressors? The solution can't always be to eliminate water deliveries. So that's something that when you sit here and you're thinking, how can I help? The education and awareness of some of the issues that dictate how we got where we are very, very helpful for you to know and be able to speak regarding those. So here's where we are today, and I know Director Ackerman, I believe, just gave a quick overview of the reservoir conditions. So this is as of this week. So currently the State Water Project is at 15%. They started out at 10%. They already got bumped up 5% just recently when we had a little bit of rainfall. We're at 0. We will receive our initial water allocation here in the next couple of weeks. By law, our water contract year is a little bit different than the State Water Project. Ours actually begins March 1 and will go through February 28th. So by the end of February, we'll have our initial water allocation. But looking at everything, looking at the dynamics, knowing how much needs to be set aside for the protection of fish species, we anticipate being at a 0 water allocation. Second year in a row. The scary part is we don't know that we're actually going to get bumped up. And that is where growers aren't certain what they're going to do, because they've just come off of a year of a 0 water allocation. They've depleted every resource that they have from their water accounts, probably their bank accounts, The first thing that financial institutions will ask growers is, what's your water allocation? I can't tell you how many phone calls we get at Westlands from financial institutions saying, what does it look like? Or from our rural communities. We'll have a housing development that's planned in one of our rural communities, and they will call and say, can you give us an overview of your water allocation? Because they know water allocation in their communities means jobs. And if they don't have that backbone, then they're not going to be able to sustain the project that they're looking to build. So as you can see, the red line, which is a little hard to read, is the historical average of where each of the reservoirs in the state of California should be. They aren't there. They're actually filling a little bit slowly right now, but clearly we have so much to make up for. We're hopeful that, as the report was given, that the storm that's headed this direction will provide some precipitation, but more importantly, you need that snowpack. DWR, Department of Water Resources, does a snowpack reading 4 times in the winter, and they measure the water content of the actual snow up above Lake Tahoe and Echo Summit. And so they take that, and by the snowpack, the water content, they're able to determine how much water will feed into our natural watersheds. And so this past winter, when they went up and did the snowpack reading in 2014, the second time they were up there, they could actually see the footprints of where they'd been the month before. There'd been no snow. Then the third time they went up there, the footprints weren't there because it was just dirt. There was no snowpack. And so they come with a big, long prong to measure it, but there's really nothing to measure. So it's frightening because we can't create water. We can conserve, and we're trying to conserve, and we continue to conserve, but when you have zero, and you have a sophisticated delivery system, and every drop of water is accounted for, you can't conserve your way out of zero. And that's where we are. So you're feeling excited now? Have I brought you down? I'm so sorry. So here is just a quick overview of water allocation within Westlands. I know it's a busy chart, but up at the top is the triangle and square that shows the initial water allocation and the final water allocation that each of the water projects get each year. We start out with an initial. The goal is we'll keep ratcheting it up. We don't know that that's going to occur. State Water Project, they're at 15%. If we don't get a heavy downpour or snowpack, they can be brought down and reduced. And we've seen that happen this past year. Nothing is safe. People used to think it was. And we used to think so too, because up at the top, up until about 20 years ago, we always had 100% initial water allocation and a final 100% water allocation. Well, you can see now that over the last number of years, it's just been all over the place. We don't know from one year to the next. It's like saying, you tell me, I'll give you $1,000 right now if you tell me what the weather's going to be like in 2017. I don't know. That's what growers are working with. I don't know. How do you continue operating when you have no idea with reliability? That's where farmers are. Farmers are having to make their planting decisions. Actually, they made their planting decisions for this year, this past October. They have crops in the ground right now, and they're just gauging and hoping that they will have enough water or that they can find the water to see those crops through. So here is just a quick chart of the regulatory layers every couple of years that occur that continue to say, okay, we're going to mandate this latest regulation, but that means it's going to be a great regulation, but it's going to take water away from agricultural deliveries. And so you can see it just continues moving down, 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 where that means less water can go toward agricultural purposes, more water continues to go for environmental purposes. And so it's really frustrating because I'm the public affairs representative, and so part of it is media relations and interviews and all those things that occur. And yet every day you can look in the newspaper and see that somebody is saying, well, agriculture uses 80%. I mean, let's be honest. How many of you have heard that? Agriculture uses 80%. The opponents are doing a wonderful job putting some of that information out there. I have a chart here coming up, and I'll show you that the California Water Action Plan shows that agriculture is using less water than environment. Here's the proof. Here's how we've gotten to that point. So when you have that 0 water percent allocation, communities are affected. And Westlands is made up of a number of very rural, agriculture-based communities that depend on farming activity. And so these are some of our West Side communities. And basically what this is showing, in 2009, when we had our first 0 water allocation, our West Side communities, their unemployment skyrocketed upwards to close to 45%. The dark blue line is water allocation, the line that's kind of going zigzag. That's water allocation. So there's a definite correlation. When water allocation is high, unemployment is low. But the opposite is what we're dealing with now. So water allocation is very, very low. Unemployment is skyrocketing. And some of our communities have not recovered. And these are businesses that actually are just things like maybe a restaurant that requires a viable community that can afford to go out and have a meal or go to the sandwich shop or do whatever. It's not happening. The grocery stores have closed. One of our local mayor from the town of Mendota, Mayor Robert Silva, wonderful spokesperson, he actually has owned a grocery store. And during 2009, he did not have anyone in his grocery store because all of the people that would usually be there were standing in a food line to get a handout of groceries that they could not afford to purchase. And that's the reality of it. The reality is, another one of our small towns, the only financial institution pulled out of town. There was no need for anyone to have banking, none. And it's still that way today. So the issue here is, if we want to see agriculture continue, we have to find ways to turn this around. If we want to see some of our farming communities continue, we have to turn this around. And agriculture can be and is a viable entity in the state of California. So, criticism. We get told, well, you guys need to really be doing a better job. You should not be flood irrigating. Well, this chart is showing that back in 1985, flood or furrow irrigation was the way to go. You just basically flooded the field, soaked it, walked away from it, it was good to go. Then we slowly started transitioning to today, in 2014, within Westlands, our growers are 93% irrigation efficient, where they don't use anything but some type of advanced irrigation efficiency. And by that, what I mean by that is, so when you grow a bed of tomatoes, and those tomatoes are just full of wonderful plant, and underneath the plant, it's an umbrella that covers the fruit underneath, and it's just lush and wonderful. Well, the growers have invested in putting a buried drip irrigation system. So here's the surface, and they have about 8 to 12 inches below the soil a buried irrigation tape. And so now, don't forget, we have our fully enclosed water delivery system that eliminates any seepage or evaporation, any of those things, connects with that, and that water flows through the buried irrigation tape and is delivered right here, down here to the root zone. So the water that the plant receives comes up through the root zone, and actually, from the time it leaves the open California Aqueduct San Luis Canal, it never sees the light of day until it goes through the underground delivery system, comes through the buried irrigation that the growers have to pay for themselves, and comes up through the journey of a plant. That's water efficiency. That's what we're doing in Westlands. I don't know how we can continue to conserve more, but our growers are open to it. They are always looking for new and better ways to provide irrigation efficiencies. Next week, I don't know if any of you have a chance to be in Tulare, but it's going to be like the Macy's parade of the world. It'll be the World Ag Expo. Every wonderful component in the agricultural industry, piece of equipment, everything will be on display. And if you have a chance, I would encourage you to go there and see many of the wonderful innovations that are being used in agriculture and farming practices to make our world better, to make it cleaner and safer, and to get us the best possible yield with the smallest amount of input. So we have a 0 water allocation. What are growers doing to get through this? Unfortunately, they're having to pull off of groundwater. If they do have groundwater, and not all of our growers do, so we've seen record number of wells being drilled this year. We know that groundwater use is not a permanent solution. In fact, the projects were created to alleviate the dependency on it, and yet, as I said earlier, here we are with a broken system. We're now drawing this past year, our growers drew almost 700,000 acre feet in groundwater. That's an enormous amount that should not be utilized. But when you have a zero water allocation, there's only a few things you can do. You can either fallow land, and this year our growers fallowed a third of the district. So we're 600,000 acres. 220,000 acres were fallowed or removed. We had growers this year that had to they'd planted crops or they had permanent crops in the ground, trees. They just didn't have the water for it. They left the crops to die, didn't harvest them, and we actually had growers that removed trees. And you've probably seen that. And it's not just in Westlands. It's in the Porterville area, the citrus communities. They are ripping out citrus trees as well. So it's very, very frustrating. Growers do what they can, gauging with the information that they have to try to make their operations sustainable. So if you drill a well, it's going to run you about $750,000 for one well to be put in. And right now, two of the well drillers in our area, they're running about a year behind a waiting list because it's just such a huge demand. But there are many of our growers that don't have access to drilled water, to groundwater. So what do? They have to purchase water in the open market. So we will go out, Westlands will, and we will look for additional water, supplemental water from water districts maybe north of the area that have a little bit more of an allocation. So typically our water, if we had a contract year, it would run about $137 an acre foot. This year our supplemental water rate has been $800 to $1,100 an acre foot, if we can locate it. We take far more orders from our growers than we can actually deliver. So if I have one grower that said, earlier in the year I thought $800 an acre foot, I can't do it. I can't spend that kind of money on water. No, I'm going to hold out. I know I'll be able to find something on my own. Well, when I talked to him later in the year, he said, I really wish I would have bought the $800 an acre foot, because when he went out on the open market, it was upwards of $2,000 an acre foot. So it's almost becoming unaffordable. So you ask, what's the future of farming? These growers don't know. We've had a few that have had an opportunity to liquidate some of their land. They've had a buyer, and I know one grower that felt very comfortable doing that and reduced some of it. It's scary. We're not certain what will occur. And then growers, if they have some water left in their account, they can carry it forward to the next year. So we talk about supplemental water. This past year, we were able to, at the end of this year, we just ended 2014, we were able to locate 101,000 acre feet. So 100,000 acre feet for our growers. But we didn't get most of it delivered until just recently. So growers had this whole past year to try to continue their farming operation without having the water in their water accounts. So what they will do is, more than likely, those that purchased it will carry it over and have that water available for this year, starting out in 2015, and that's one of the ways that they'll bridge it. But it's not a good situation. So here's, quickly, and I know I don't want to take up too much time. So in 2009, here was a satellite image of Westlands, and the brown areas are the fallowed areas. And so we had only 317,000 acres farmed. So you can see that here is this past year, even more brown areas. So this is where we fallowed 220,000 acres. And it just has continued to get worse. And so people will ask me, well, what do you see when you're out there on the west side? Well, most growers have to keep something going in their operation. So they're usually going to fallow anywhere from 10 to 25%. This year I'm hearing some may be fallowing 30%. So what you're going to see is you're going to see a planted field next to an empty field. Well, if anyone has driven through the I-5 corridor and you're out there and you leave Kettleman City, you've just gotten your in and out, you're heading up north, you're going to be to San Francisco by the evening. I know he's laughing because he does it all the time. I know. So as you're heading up north and you start driving through that area that really there's nothing there but farming, does it ever get a little windy? It gets windy. So if you have an empty field that's sitting there with nothing but dirt, no crop in the ground, what are you going to have? Dust storm. So there is really a safety issue. There's an air quality issue as well. When you have that swirling around, you're not able to have much control over what things are going to look like. So there's a huge concern, not to mention that when you have crops in the ground, you have productivity, you're generating revenue, you're generating jobs, etc. School enrollments too. School enrollments have dropped drastically because people have just moved out of the area. So just very quickly, so here's just an idea of a trend. As you can see, the black line is followed acreage and how that has just skyrocketed, and productivity has continued to drop off because we just don't have that water that we need to continue with a vibrant direction of agriculture that we should. And here's another chart that shows, again, the fruits and vegetables. That also includes some of our almonds and pistachios. And so that's trending higher, but it's dipping and dropping down. And so we anticipate to see that drop even more. And then
how much of that is permanent crop versus perennial crop?
A little less than probably a third. And we know that permanent crops have been on the rise, and I'm happy to address that for you right now. So we know that right now the number one crop in the world is almonds. This past year, our number one crop has always been processing tomatoes. And processing tomatoes is a huge industry, and most of our growers, I don't know any of them that don't have processing tomatoes, or a few of them that don't. But quite frankly, the cost, the revenue generated from almonds is enormous. And our growers only grow what the market demands. They don't grow a crop that doesn't have a market for it. And so when you're paying $800 to $1,100 an acre foot, you need to cover those costs. And we have growers that quite frankly say, I'm going to grow the high value crops because I have to cover the operational side to grow the lettuce that you expect on your table tonight, to grow the tomato sauce that will be in your pizza when you have a beer with that salad and pizza tonight. So you've got to balance out your plan. And we take criticism for that. We do. But you need to stand in our shoes and know that you've got to decide if you want irrigated agriculture in this area or not. If we aren't able to give our growers the opportunity or allow them to earn the revenue that will keep them farming, we're going to see agriculture exit the state of California. And when agriculture exits, we lose food safety and food security because, quite frankly, it can't be grown elsewhere except in Chile, in Mexico, and in other foreign countries that don't have any of the safety concerns that we have or the regulatory oversight that mandates everything has to pass FDA inspection. So it's a tough situation out there, and it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. So let's see. So very quickly here, this is just recently with the California Water Plan, just updated it, showing that agriculture is using 41%. Agriculture is becoming more and more efficient, and currently right now the environmental purposes are at 49%, and then municipal and industrial, it was 10%. My gosh, that's not hardly anything at all. And there's a full plan. This kind of gives you a different view of how that has transitioned over the years. And so it is interesting when people criticize the 80% use. This plan was just released in October of 2014, an updated plan, and I'll be happy to provide links to it. Yes, sir.
When they use that 40% or 80%, what do they include? I know you just Westlands, one item, but what about the rice growers and everything else? Is that all included?
That's all inclusive. Just got a little. I'm just about done. In fact, actually, that's my last slide, and then my final one is just my contact information. So there you go. That's where I can be reached. So I'm happy to take any questions. And yes, sir.
In your closed system, delivering the water then to all the farms, actually from whatever reservoir you get it from, do you know then your water loss, since you know how much you deliver, how much you buy and how much you deliver?
Of if we have water loss? Sure. You know, I'm going to give you a subjective answer. It's minimal because part of what we do in Westlands is if we have a leak, we have our staff at our 5 Points field office. It's out in the middle of, if you've ever been to 5 Points. So we have staff that's what they do is they go through and they keep the upkeep of any of the water lines going. All of the water meters are read each month, and so any repairs 24/7, we have a hotline number, so we're out there right away. We do all of the repairs ourselves. So it's if there's a water loss, it's going to be minimal because we've got to jump on it immediately. We can't afford. Yes, sir.
There's been a new law implemented for the groundwater
Yes.
indication.
Yes.
How's that going to affect you?
Well, it's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and so clearly we have to comply with it. And it's something that there's been a huge concern about the use of groundwater over many years, and we understand that. And again, that's where we were not intended to deliver as much groundwater as we are utilizing. So we'll have to comply, and that will be a regulatory oversight that will be additional fee that will be mandated upon the growers. So, and I know he's
In the back.
in the back. Yes, sir.
Between the Valadeo bill and the Feinstein bill last year dealing with state water, which one do you believe is preferable and has more of a long-term solution to some of California's water issues?
Anyone that can get the full support to move forward. We are happy to work with any legislator that is willing to provide a solution. We have to find a solution. And so very quickly, I just want to say, coming here is a great opportunity. So when you're sitting here and you're wondering, what can I do to help? Metropolitan has been a great team player with us. We have been together on a number of issues looking at long-term fixes. That's one of them. We have to make sure that our legislators know we need cohesion, we need a solution that's going to provide something in the immediate. We can't hold out for another 10, 15 years for a major project to be built. That's great. We do want those, but 0% a second year, who knows what next year is going to be like. We have to look for some type of solution, and I would encourage you to let your elected officials know that they need to work together, and more importantly, the members of Congress are the ones that are going to have to change the ESA laws that our water agencies are mandated to comply with. Yes, sir.
Westlands is taking a leadership role. They bought out the Hills Brothers Coffee, their ranch up on McLeod River. They're working to raise Shasta Reservoir.
Yes.
This is very expensive, water that you're putting. Is Westlands also committed to fund their pro rata share of the BDCP solution that's being proposed?
No, I appreciate that, and Westlands has worked very closely with Metropolitan.
But the question is, is the district committed to pay their full pro rata share of this? And if so, how can you farm up there with that total impact? It comes up with Shasta, close to $450 an acre foot.
So to answer your question about funding part of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, we haven't seen the water reliability component yet. So it's premature for me to say that we are committed to funding it when the actual certainty of what the water delivery and water reliability would be hasn't been forthcoming as yet. So that would be a decision that our board of directors would take once that has been determined. And we know that an enormous amount of time and money, Metropolitan, Westlands, we've invested millions of dollars in studying and providing all of the necessary components. But at this point, until there's specifics to what will occur, it is premature for me to state. As for raising Shasta Dam, so we know that Shasta Dam would provide, if we were to raise it, right now the EIS, I believe, is at 18.5 feet is what's projected to raise it. That would provide additional storage, but we know, like everything, there was a lot of pushback from many of the anti-government groups that are up there that live in that area and that don't want to see that occur. So it's still a long ways off, but the additional cost, when a grower is used to spending $100+ an acre foot, but there's no water supply reliability, so now they're $800, and who knows what this year will be the price, $800 to $1,100 an acre foot. There's a little bit of wiggle room to have a higher priced amount, but knowing that you have a definite water supply reliability. That's what it's about. It's about knowing where to go and knowing what you can count on.
Well, you can see, you can go on forever on
I
the
know.
questions. Are you going to be around
I will.
after? Yeah,
Absolutely.
'cause
Looking forward.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Two observations. I'm going to have a different perspective when I go to the soup plantation from now on. And number two, you see common themes of dust. Remember the Owens Valley dust, the Salton Sea dust, and now we got the I-5 corridor dust because of the fallowing. Hopefully on a policy perspective, we don't have any dust. But anyways, second part of the presentation, I thought this was a excellent presentation on a variety of fronts, and certainly great sympathy for the farming community. And when you talk about $800, $1,000, $1,100 for water, it's scary. Okay, very good. Now we get into the policy issues on agricultural water use. Our speaker today, it seems like he knows about half of the people in the audience here. So, but I'd just like to summarize. He's been the California Agricultural Secretary of the Agricultural Department for the state of California for almost 10 years, for about 10 years. Used to be, and also he's a 3-generation farmer, grower here in Orange County, and in addition to his state assignments, in going through his resume, he's deeply involved in agricultural issues internationally, nationally, and locally. Also, he was a board member and chair of the Western Growers Association. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce A.G. Kawamura to talk about policy issues in agriculture.
Good morning, everybody. Boy, Gayle, what a good overview, and the suffering doesn't stop in the Westlands, as you know. We're facing some significant challenges really throughout the state. Even my operation, I farm from San Juan Capistrano on up to Seal Beach and everywhere in between. You know, we're edible landscapers. Our company, we look for vacant lots and we look for a fire hydrant if we can see any of those. And the weeds are growing well. That kind of makes it work for us. But this last year, in fact, in June, early June, we had a field down in San Juan Capistrano, a field of green beans, a 60-acre field. We had 20 acres planted. We were about a couple weeks ahead of harvest, and the well went dry. And we scrambled. We share the acreage down there. We lease the ground, and we share the acreage with an avocado lemon grove as well as a nursery. We were able to water Tuesday, Thursday, a little bit on Saturday, Sunday, and at 6 o'clock every day the water would be cut off so that they could water the citrus and the avocados down there. It's just a very tough situation. We lost about 15% of the acres because the little bit of water we were able to get to the field was barely enough to sustain it, and it wasn't very hot. So as we finished up the field, though, it was really clear that we ended up we were asked and we agreed that we had to shut down our operations because there wasn't enough water for the permanent crops and the permanent operations down there. So if that had been my only field, I would have been out of business this year because as of today, we're still looking at a zero allocation off that system. Now there's some metropolitan water in the area potable water that's somewhat available, but at the time the infrastructure wasn't in place, so there was no plan B. We had plan A, water, and a little bit of B and a half maybe to get us through that crisis, but in this case we don't have a plan B to go back down there right now, and so we're on a holding pattern to see if there is some way to get some different kind of imported water possibly into that area. Now I say this because if that happens to me, and Gayle mentioned that my little 60 acres that I'm not going to farm, I know one grower in her area that has 70,000 acres that's idled as of this year. It's an enormous impact, but the other thing that's happening that people don't quite recognize, but it is happening, and anybody who's dealing with landscaping out here in the crowd, we've got salt issues. With the lack of rain, you have rising salt tables within your soil, rising salts within the water that you do have, both at the groundwater level and some of the blending that's going on. So that is as big a challenge as not having water, because all of those basically affect the plants in one way or another negatively. We look at our state. I was very fortunate to work for the 7 years, not 10 years, 7 years, 2003 to 2010 for Governor Schwarzenegger, and our state continues to be amazingly in agriculture. We're the 5th largest agricultural economy in the world. So the United States is 1. All of the European Union would be 2, Brazil's 3, China's 4, depending on the year and where each of those countries are going. And California, if it was all by itself as a nation, would be number 5 as an agricultural nation. Now, we're hearing on the news that California just recently looks like it's clawed back from 8th largest economy back down to 7. I will tell you, if we don't fix our water situation, if the drought continues, I'll ask that question: how do we make that stay the 7th largest economy? And certainly for agriculture, how do we stay the 5th largest economy in the world if we don't start to address, adapt, and build in some resiliency to the systems that we've got? We've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, but we can see them. This is not something that we don't have an experience with. In fact, we've got a lot of experience. You know, the state of California produces about half of all the fruits and vegetables for the nation. One of the things that I think I'd really like to say, and this chance to talk with all of you, and if I can leave you with this thought by the time I finish speaking, is that it bothers me that we're always talking about agriculture as if it's some separate endeavor that's completely different from, apart from humans. And the fact that the food supply we all depend on every day, and Gayle, you alluded to it, whether it's a pizza, whether it's the nuts you might eat, whether it's any part of the things that you put into your body every day, 365 days out of a year, every single one of those products take water to produce, and every single one of those products then are part of the human condition. I mean, if we're going to be humans as opposed to Homo sapiens, that means we have agriculture in one way or another. And you know, it's 100 years ago, 40% of all the people in this country were engaged and earned a living in one way or another through agriculture. We all know this because we have friends that are 90, 80, 90, 100 years old even. And it doesn't take much time. Those of us who grew up in this county, we remember what this county looked like. It was one of the most tremendous agricultural productive areas on the planet, partly because of the climate, but partly because of the abundance of water that was here. And climate that's predictable is the best place to farm. Unpredictable weather is something that's not exciting for any of us that are farmers. And if that's the new norm, that affects the entire global food supply, and that's exactly why, whether it's ministries of agriculture around the world, whether it's folks that are looking at policy about where we headed with 9 billion people plus on the planet by the year 2050, we're starting to recognize that what is that challenge up ahead of us? How do we maintain the capacity to feed everybody? We here in California, in Southern California, in the United States, we'll go to the store over these next decades, and believe me or not, I would assume and I would expect there will always be some kind of abundance going on in the stores, and we get a lot of choices. Our country, though, when you have so many choices, you get a lot of odd ideas of what the food supply should be and how it should be produced, who should produce it, who should be shut down. There's great things that happen when you create abundance, and there's also great havoc that happens when you have so much abundance that people don't appreciate the lessons learned from the past. That fellow on the far right actually is a farmer with our family that he helped to teach me how to farm. I remember touching a large animal here in Costa Mesa in a barn when I was a little kid. It was part of a meal team. So that's how quickly we've advanced into the kind of agriculture we have right now. But I wanted to make sure we understand policy-wise that this is not something new. We were just talking about the new Dust Bowl that might be created by fallowed land. Anybody here from Oklahoma, of the Dust Bowl area? If you talk to your uncles or your grandparents, it was an unbelievable. There's a great book called The Worst Hard Times, one of the most important books I think I've ever read as a farmer, because it teaches me I should have no right to complain. Some of the issues that they dealt with significant climate issues that completely altered what was going on in our own country 70, 80 years ago, it's unbelievable that is somehow forgotten as where we might end up. If we end up with a 10-year drought, it won't be different than what we saw down in Australia this past decade. We had a chance to go down there on a drought tour in Australia, and they had 10-year droughts. Their agricultural production for the entire nation collapsed by 50%. 50%. They had more towns shutting down. How many towns do we have in California right now where we're importing potable water to those towns? Was it 16, 17, 18? I don't know what the number is right now. It's a tremendous amount where the Plan B doesn't exist for those towns yet because we haven't built the Plan B for those towns for potable water, or for water for Plan B for certain areas that don't have that have access to water, but we haven't built the infrastructure to bring it or to clean it up or to reutilize it. And so, going back to whether it's the Anasazi Indians out here in the Southwest, significant droughts are not something impossible for us to envision in our area. And so, eyes open. What we have to do is just understand that this capacity to feed a world is not something that's given. Whether it's grains, those of us that grow fruits and vegetables, and those of us that are in California, everybody kind of forgets the way our food system in the world is, and then our food system in this country. In the Midwest, 80% at least of all the agriculture in the Midwest is rain-fed. They hope it rains enough, not too much, and that's the kind of deal they have. So much so that when rain doesn't show up over certain decades, it kind of helped push the creation of a farm bill, because you'd have areas that would be wiped out because the rains didn't come, or they had too cold and too wet a spring and couldn't get the planting in, and the nation's food supply would crash. And so they had subsidies, they had different kinds of insurance programs, and that was basically put in place during the Depression, during the Dust Bowl years, so that you didn't have a complete elimination of the capacity to feed the country. Maybe you can argue all day long that it's gotten a bit out of control, that there's things that have happened that could be and are being improved in this new farm bill. Here in California, though, we are a nation unto ourselves, if you will, a state that irrigates. I would argue that almost 90% of the value of California production, not volume, but about 90% of our value of our crops all come from turning water on and off. We're a state with a very predictable Mediterranean climate, and as such, with great soil, we're able to very predictable weather. In fact, the most predictable weather in the world is where? In the desert. And when you add water, some of the greatest growing potentiality, and you add sun, you add water, you add soil, you can grow amazing amounts of crops with the right kind of controls in those systems. And that's what we have as an enormous, incredible asset and resource of what California is all about. So as we're trying to feed a planet, it's something that the public doesn't quite ever get a chance to think it through. But I have to tell all of you, your stakeholders in this outcome, your stakeholders in agriculture being a successful, because whether it's in this room, I would argue all day long, it probably won't affect you as much. If you had to double up what you pay for food out of your diets and on that, I shouldn't maybe assume anything. But doubling, we spend about 7-8% of our income on food in this country. Most other countries throughout the rest of the world are 20, 30, and higher percent of their income annually is spent on food. So if we went from 8, 9, 10% to 20%, we would just suddenly be closer to some of these other countries. But if that were to happen, all those other countries that depend a lot on our food supply, supplying them, and some of the other systems that are taking place while population is going up, these are kind of the challenges I think you face, because now you see how quickly the world could get out of kilter with supplying food for large populations. And the minute you see that, like the Arab Spring, you start to see potential for an enormous disruption in terms of how populations get fed and the political ramifications then are part of that, wars and the rest. People get there's a tremendous amount of unrest when the people aren't fed. Not something new, right? All of this stuff then is historic. All of this stuff, if you look in your rearview mirror and remember where you've been, allows you then to think about where you want to go. I learned a huge lesson last year. Remember in September here, we had a couple of big storms come up the Pacific, and they kind of took a nice right turn just before they reached Southern California. We had 3 near-miss hurricanes last year, right? Everybody was watching them. They tracked in and they kind of went inland. Many of you may not. My neighbor is a great farmer. His name's Roy Perchie. He farms out here near Seal Beach with me, but he's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. But he's 90 years old this year, and he remembers in 1939, he was 15 years old, born in 1925. They had finished harvesting their lima beans down here out just north of Seal Beach area. And he was at the house. It was a Sunday night. He was telling me the story. He went inside that night. They had dinner, went outside, put his hand out, and a big old raindrop hit it. And it rained 6 inches of rain that night from a hurricane that tracked up the California coast after a 10-day heat spell. And so the Pacific had heated up enough. There's enough energy in that water, and the hurricane tracked right here. If you go online, look up 1939 Hurricane Newport Beach. It's an amazing clip to show that hurricane that took place in September and the boats that were trying to struggle to get back in because there was no phones. There was no advance warning, no satellite system, no weather report that showed that hurricane was on its way. And so what we see today, though, is we can track weather temperatures. Whether you're in Africa, whether you're in here, you can track weather. You can make adjustments. You can see that the layout ahead of you is something you better start to worry about, or you better start to prepare for, and more importantly, you better start investing in the systems that give you more predictability in this outcome that we call agriculture, and it's your food supply. My fields are, we're employing so much new technology. I was so happy to see those percentages of water efficient use in Westlands. We've been using drip irrigation here for a long time because Pierre charges a lot of money for water. We pay some of the highest water rates here in Orange County anywhere on the planet, but we do it because we know it's a tight resource, and we have to save our efficiencies and drive the crops that we can make a dime out of. And so some of the crops we used to grow, like celery, which took a lot of water, we're the high-cost producer competing with Mexico, and Baja is 90 miles away, competing with Santa Maria or Ventura, where they have had cheaper water. And after 50 years of growing celery, we quit growing celery because our model was wrong, and we were going to lose money. And that's what's happening with all kinds of different production systems throughout the state, and actually throughout the country, but especially in our state or in Florida. You start to see this decision by a farmer who's growing food. He likes to grow food, but of course he's in business to make money, obviously. Some of us stay in business and lose a lot of money for a while before we really realize that that's not working, and we quit or sell our ground. But the food production capacity for our country really depends on us moving forward, not backwards. And we're all employing some great new systems. We're looking for new technologies, from drought tolerant, salt tolerant, new kinds of varieties, things that we can grow, new manners of growing things. And I'll be the first to say, we have to, you can't get in your mind that, we can grow all our food on a rooftop. We can grow a lot of food on rooftops. We can grow a lot of food in odd places, and that's starting to happen. You're starting to see people go inside and do closed environment systems. But that's not going to cover the field tomatoes that you need to grow, for example, for all your pastes, although it might for a while. Fresh tomatoes is another story. I'll show you a picture here in a sec. But growing enough rice. You're not going to grow rice on the top of a building. You're not going to grow wheat on the top of a building. Corn you're not going to grow. So don't get it in your mind when you start to hear about how exciting the future is for some kinds of agriculture. It's not all agriculture. Same thing with livestock. We're looking at great systems. 50% of the tomatoes that are being produced in our country right now, or Mexico or Canada, are coming out of these kind of systems. This is vine-ripe tomatoes. And these systems, because you can start to go vertical, you're no longer measuring your production by the square foot. You're starting to measure production by the cubic foot. And you're starting to see some of these amazing systems produce things like lettuce. This is aquaponic lettuce with some fish underneath there, but you're starting to see both protein production, food production in places, in ways that we haven't seen in a long time. In fact, I gave this little speech because that's true. You have the marijuana growers of America to thank for this kind of production system that's gotten really, really efficient over time. And it's true, though. These systems are becoming available to the average citizen for their, not hobby farming, but for their own home use, if you will. And more you're going to see some of this. But it doesn't replace the bread that you're going to eat. It doesn't replace much of the beverages you might have. There's this system that we call agriculture. The better definition in this century is we're in the business of managing life systems and resources and trying to do it sustainably. And that's really the goal here, because if we're going to get to 2050 and we have abundance and we build in abundance, which means we've built in the infrastructure to allow for abundance. That's kind of where we have to be right now, because ultimately everything we do grow has to have water. Some of those hydroponic systems might use 80%, 90% less water than a field, but it still needs water. You still have to put water, you still have to put sunlight, you still have to put some kind of nutrients, and then you get food out of it. And nothing's changed. These systems that we're putting in place today, though, are amazing. I have always said this in many speeches, that we don't have a shortage of water. We've got a kind of a salt problem, really, because those of us who see the ocean every day, or those of us who are under atmospheric water, and that was Linda was mentioning that. It was that her science quote that there's a lot of water up in the atmosphere, but all that water is harvestable if you want to invest significant dollars into the systems that makes it abundant. And once you do it, especially if you do it with renewable energy, there's some great opportunities to change our outlook of where we're going, the predictability of water supply for Southern California. In this room, of course, I think I'm preaching to the choir, because you have some of the most progressive, forward-thinking guys on the planet. In fact, some of the lessons we've learned here in terms of water reuse, in terms of how you handle water, how you treat water, how you move it around, how you put it back into our aquifers, that's part of the template for the rest of the world to follow. If all the rest of the world did just what we did right now, we'd be in a much, much better place. And looking forward at the year 2050, I would feel tremendously more comfortable if the rest of the world did things the way we do things here in this county. I got a chance to drive that little hydrogen car off of some of the hydrogen coming off the plant here. That's an amazing thing, to take human sewer and digest it, bleed off the hydrogen, run fuel cells, and run a fleet of cars. This is great. It's 2014. It's not 1930. This is what I'm saying. I always put this in there because I'm still a big believer that we could store enormous amounts of fresh water out in the ocean. It's just, what engineer is going to say, oh, I can do that, instead of everybody says, oh, that's stupid. Why would we do that? Well, if you're in the dam building business on land, well, you don't like this picture, right? But if you're an engineer that says, hey, we could store enormous volumes of fresh water with this atmospheric river that's coming in up north, or any storms that we get here, these floodwaters, and the way to look at this is, in the Chesapeake Bay at flood stage, you can collect potable water 4 or 5 miles offshore, right? Because that at the Chesapeake Bay, that enormous volume of water coming out of that watershed is just going out in the ocean. In dilution, it doesn't dilute very easily until you give it time. Well, why wouldn't you collect some of this water for us? And why isn't that one of our strategies? Those are the kind of questions you have to ask, especially if you've got these kind of systems, renewable energy systems, that can be plugged in to help move that water Dilution is the solution. You guys have talked about that forever. And it's time for us to kind of create and really visualize these kind of opportunities. Great Park. For production, I'm farming in between the different runways there over here at the old El Toro Marine Base. It's some of the best ground on the planet. It's amazing. What was hard here is I didn't have any water when we got out there, so we had to plumb it in. That's no different than what we're seeing on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. This state has invested in the plumbing systems to water out in Coachella Valley, water up in the west sides, water the state so that we can create tremendous amounts of abundance. That's an investment in our future. I don't know how we get to the point where we don't think we need it, or we think somehow that it's incompatible with environmental goals. Because I think what's changed now, and you're seeing it all the time, a good friend of mine talks about it. There's the hatefuls and the hopefuls. The hatefuls are the people that are out there. They're always peddling fear. They get membership because they tell everybody the sky's falling. They you know who they are, and they don't want to see progress necessarily. They want to just keep their organization alive, and they do it by conflict and by lawsuit and all kinds of. It's getting tiring to deal with some of those folks. The hopefuls, which I would say are all you people in this room, you see solution sets, you see ways of moving forward, learning from the past, and actually putting into play new things that give you a chance to get excited about how this future looks especially for the younger generation ahead of us. It's not something that we can't do. We're doing it all over the place. I'm looking at little systems like these to grow strawberries. Why? Well, this uses 80% less water. I don't have to plow. I don't have to use a tractor. I can put these systems into play, and maybe it might be something that will be part of our future very shortly if I can see how they work and dial it in correctly. We can look at the world as a couple of things. I'll be the first to say we have the capacity to feed everybody on the planet, give everybody a wonderful diet today. We don't do it because we just don't have the will to do it. We have societies, civil societies or not so civil societies that let their population starve. Here in the United States, we're devoted to try and put into food programs, different kinds of things that will make sure that our country never has a moment of hunger that's chronic and long-lasting. We are trying really hard to end hunger. In fact, we've got some programs here, just in Orange County, that we said if we can't end hunger in Orange County, how's that possible that we think we can do it on the planet? And so we're doing some neat things over at the El Toro base, trying to work with Second Harvest Food Bank and some of the other food banks on some neat projects to end hunger in the county. All of this folds out, and thanks, by the way, to Irvine Ranch Water District, because they're part of that project, supplying some water, reclaimed water, by the way, for that growing food, custom growing food for the food banks. But our ultimate goal here, when you're talking about policy, you guys know, Don, you asked me to talk about policy. You guys know more about policy than I do, I'm going to guess, many of you, because that's what we're living and breathing right now. We have a state that is so upside down by overregulation, and whether let's call it CEQA modernization or ESA modernization. Let's use the word modernization because we just need to move into this century and away from the past, understand where we've been. But this was the former officers' housing at the El Toro Great Park there. They took out the houses, we took out the foundations, and guess what was underneath that great those cement foundations with some really good dirt, really good soil. It was better term than dirt. And it was amazing how quickly we were able to bring that back into full production. This is one of the fields that we're using to feed food for the food bank. So let me finish by just saying this. Our goal here as a state is, first of all, to remember why agriculture is important. That would be my goal for you today. You're stakeholders in the outcome of agricultural capacity to continue to feed us every day. So much of the products, I wish I had the number, how much food you eat every day comes from California. I wish I had that number. I think it's a pretty high number. Sure, we import a lot of food. We import a lot of beer. But our goal right now is to make sure that we shore up that capacity to continue to feed ourselves and the rest of the country. Our goal is that that's an economic driver. Our goal is that there's resources that we have that we need to reopen, and more importantly, there's some policy work that if our new policy folks that are up in Sacramento or in Washington, we have a lot of new legislators, if they can relearn where we've been, where we are, more importantly, where we can go, I think that's how you can get revisioning on what this state and this country is all about. We can revision with a different kind of focus because we have a better imagination from what we're learning today and not stuck in that past. So, Don, I'd be happy to answer some questions and any other things. So thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you, too. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really great. I enjoyed it. Do you happen to know what happened when you take the 5 down, just when you go into Oceanside? There used to be all those tomato fields on the right view.
Yeah, we used to farm down there too. That the military base in Camp Pendleton after 9/11, and they went into pretty high security crouch. Those of us that were farming down there got pushed off for a little while because we just couldn't have access and couldn't get our crews in. The company that was forever there on the ocean side of that, Oceanside Produce, doing the tomatoes, they had a family problem and actually had to shut down their operations for a while until they could get new financing. And now they're back again, but in that interim, the government at this point has said, just stay out of there. And the ground's laying fallow, not because it can't be farmed, but at this point it's a regulatory decision. I think many of us are hopeful of the day that a whole swath of land could be put back into agriculture. In fact, if anybody knows how to make that happen, please give us a call. So that's the challenge, but that's again one of the greatest remaining open pieces of land for agriculture anywhere in the state. No, it was purely driven by some of the high security challenges and some other issues that were on site. Yes.
Have you been able to have the agricultural community been able to convince the environmental community that if they don't support agriculture, they're really defying their own ethics? Because if we don't grow agriculture here, it's grown elsewhere, and then we're not only increasing the carbon footprint, but we're eliminating all the oversight and everything that we have in this country. I mean, they're defeating their own purpose.
I couldn't agree with you more. What's nice and exciting is there's a few of the mainstream environmental groups that have started to realize that, again, it's 2014, they can see the picture and they're not the hatefuls anymore. They're starting to realize they need agriculture for any number of reasons, good reasons, and are starting to work with them. Not all groups, believe me, there's plenty of groups that just mentally are caught up in a war mentality, but there's this idea that there's solutions from the land. I'm a part of a group right now called Solutions from the Land. It's a national organization that we've put together just in these last 7 years, many of us realizing that we've got great challenges ahead of us, but we've got solutions to work with. And as we speak right now, we're putting together a North American Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture. It was driven by the United Nations. The United Nations, if you type in climate smart agriculture, United Nations, they just basically announced that that's what we hope to do, is see a leapfrogging of agriculture all over the planet to start to understand that you got to deal with environmental, climate, carbon sequestration, and actually the profitability so you can stay in business. It's those 3 platforms. And part of that group is driven by a lot of environmental organizations that believe that this is where we have to go. And so the fighting is, again, instead of fighting, it's more of a handhold as we hope to move forward. What is happening, and RWD, I just look to them because they've created great templates for creating a wetlands situation. There's good partnering that's taking place without cutting out agriculture. And I think that's what we're trying to show, that take the toolbox in any watershed, anywhere on this country, open the toolbox and let's fill it with robust new tools on how do you solve some of these biggest challenges, instead of saying, oh, we can't do anything, or you can't farm, right? So thanks for that question, because there's a lot of hope there, and I think that's what many of us are working towards.
Now, Angie, do you have time after the meeting?
Yes, I do.
Okay, well, let's give a show our appreciation to our 2 speakers. Complimentary presentations on the agricultural picture. So I hope you gained a lot from this presentation, and I'm certain all of us have a different perspective on how efficient our agricultural community is. So you have a good day, and I hope to see you next week.